Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited to, God, is it June? I was going to say kick off the year. Kick off the year with Angular World Tour. Welcome to Angular RTP. Today we have a special session where we're doing Angular World Tour. So this is so awesome. And, basically going around to all the different local meetups. So if you know local meetups who might want to have like Angular core team people come and hang out or whatever, definitely check out angularworldtour.com. And on angularworldtour.com, you can also check out like all the different links in terms of, the local cities that we'll be in. So, whoops. Where's my, okay, there we go. All right, so wanted to give a big shout out to our sponsors, especially Minko and Angular team. Like, thanks so much for supporting this. And, goal really here was to like revive the community and get everybody out and hanging out. So thank you, Minko, for participating. And same thing with John and to all the rest of our speakers that are going to be joining us. We have a bunch of upcoming events. If you want free training, there's JavaScript Marathon happening in a few weeks. If you care about React and you're Angular, you can check out State of React Ecosystem soon. If you know any women in tech who would like just monthly mentoring, we do those for free every month. And then we also have State of UI coming up at the end of July. So lots of really fun events coming up. Today, Minko is going to give us an update on Angular updates. So Minko's on the Angular core team. Jia is also on the Angular team and basically is the Zone.js, main person on Zone.js. He's also at this.labs. And then myself, I'm on the RxJS core team and a Google developer expert for Angular. So very excited to be here. And Minko, I think that's it. And maybe, you can take it away with and give us State of Angular updates.
That sounds good. Let me share my screen.
Also, for those of you listening, you can make sure to, add comments for any of the presentations on YouTube, and we'll be able to see them and be able to answer them. And, we'll probably do a little bit of Q&A at the very end if anybody has any questions. So just FYI. Okay, Minko, I see your thing. There you go.
Perfect. Full screen, right?
Yes, it is.
Great. Yeah. So hello, everyone. As Tracy mentioned already, I'm working on Angular at Google. And today I would want to share with you the state of Angular. Here we're going to discuss what is the position of Angular within Google, Angular in the open source community. I would want to highlight a couple of community projects, and we're going to discuss what we just released as part of version 12, also what we shared publicly on Google I/O, and what are we going to be working on in the future. I would also love to answer your questions. So if you have any questions about Angular or any questions about our roadmap, that is available on angular.io/guide/roadmap. Please feel free to ask them in the chat. All right, so we have been talking a lot about how Google supports Angular. We're clearly a Google project that Google supports and uses internally, but we haven't been talking that much about how Angular supports Google. Something that I love to say is that Google runs on Angular. So if you are a employee in the company, in order to interact with your colleagues by sharing issues and collaborating on different bugs together, you're going to be using a platform that is developed in Angular. It is called Buganizer. If you want to look up some source code in our Mon repo, which has a couple of billions of lines of code, you'll be interacting with a user interface that is implemented in Angular. This is the so-called code search UI that is, in fact, open source. You can find its source code on GitHub. If you want to edit a file, you can use our text editor, our cloud-based text editor that is implemented in Angular as well. And finally, if you are going to open a CL, this is how we call our pull requests, change lists, you're going to interact with a code review system that is implemented in Angular as well. And these are just 4 examples of the thousands of other applications that are implemented in Angular in the company. There are quite a few public-facing apps as well, primarily around enterprise customers, such as the Google Cloud Console, which is one of the biggest Angular apps that I'm aware of. Every time I look up its source code, and the Mon repo, it has 1 million more lines of code. Firebase Console is another example. So also Google Domains and Google Analytics. And on these applications, there are quite a few developers working on. Based on the metrics that we're getting from people who are interacting with different technologies within the Mon repo, we see that there are thousands of engineers altering Angular source code monthly. And our Angular 101 and 201 courses are taken by about 1,000 engineers a year. So a good question is, why even bother making Angular open source if it is filling such an important role in Google? Well, there are quite a few examples. As someone who is coming directly from the Angular community, I've been working on Angular for about 2.5 years now, but prior to that, for about 7 years at least, I was collaborating externally. I have quite a few good reasons for that. So first of all, hiring. Clearly, if you are familiar with a tech stack that is very heavily used inside of Google, then, well, when you become a software engineer in the company, you'll be productive very quickly. You know the basic concepts, and you just have to understand how they fit into the larger infrastructure within Google, with Bezo and all the different interesting tools that we use in order to manage this large Mon repo. The ecosystem is a huge advantage. I've been collaborating to this ecosystem for a while now, and the resources that are coming from within Google and from outside of Google, they're all useful across the board. So it doesn't matter whether you release your open source library on GitHub, the chances are that it's going to be used by many different companies and many different developers around the world. For instance, in 2015, I believe, or was it 2016, I worked on a tool called Collizer, which ended up being part of the internal Google Mon repo way before I joined Google. We're also getting a lot of feedback, and we're getting it in a more structured form through our annual developer surveys, but also we're getting feedback constantly on GitHub and the different channels of communication. I'm confident that we're going to get some excellent feedback during the meetup today as well. And quality. There are hundreds of thousands of eyes on the Angular source code. People who are constantly looking at the source files, looking at the issues and the pull requests that are in our repository. So with this attention, people are finding a lot of interesting places for improvement. We have been getting a lot of interesting feedback in different forms, and also sometimes people are directly finding bugs and fixing them on GitHub. Now I would want to spend some more time talking about the ecosystem, because it has like special place for me, being part of the Angular community for that long. The adoption in the open source community, we notice a significant growth there as well. So NPM doesn't necessarily reflect the most accurately how given technology is being used, because a lot of different companies are consuming these technologies from other sources. Most of the enterprises I'm talking to are in fact using Angular from internal registries or from Mon repo structure similar to what we do inside of Google. But still, we notice significant growth from 1.4 to, as of today, actually 2.6 million weekly downloads. And currently, there are between 1.8 and 1.9 million projects on GitHub, open source projects on GitHub, that depends on Angular framework. Some of these projects vary. For example, Trung Vo, he developed a Spotify player in Angular. He's using very interesting modern libraries. He's using, I believe, NX and NGXS, and there is a production application. It is a fully functional Spotify player that is constantly growing. So if you're interested in looking up his source code in order to gain more experience in Angular, or if you want to just use Angular all across the board, even for your music application, feel free to check this application out on GitHub. We had also the privilege to work together with Harvard on a research where they developed an antiviral for COVID-19. For their research, they used an Angular application in order to visualize molecule bindings and different proteins and how they relate to each other. They were using Angular entirely for the UI, so we collaborated on them to make sure that they're running fewer change detection cycles that they need to. But it was a great opportunity to see how a technology kind of makes a difference. There were other open source projects involved in this application, so it wasn't only Angular. It was different Angular components coming from the community as well. So this is actually what is that exciting for me in the open source. You push something on GitHub and you have no idea what transitive impact it could have on the world. Manfred is a prominent community member who has been working on development tooling for a while. We have been collaborating closely with him, and as part of his work, he implemented a solution for micro frontends by using module federation as an extension of the Angular CLI. And with other teams such as NG0, we have been collaborating closely on implementation of the image component here that guarantees that your applications are following best practices when it comes down to showing images so that they don't regress in terms of performance measured by Core Web Vitals. And talking about Core Web Vitals, being part of the internal Google ecosystem allows us to collaborate close with Google Chrome. Google Chrome has this initiative called Aurora, or the Web SDK, of which we're part of, where they're reaching out to different popular tech stacks. They're working on finding the users where they are. So they're looking at the most popular technologies out there, such as Next.js, Angular. Next.js is a technology that we have been collaborating closely with. This gives us the opportunity to not only improve the Angular's performance based on Core Web Vitals, but also be part of the implementation of the Core Web Vitals metrics. For example, we notice a regression in largest contentful paint caused by the way we're hydrating server-side render views, and we worked with our metrics team on implementing an algorithm that actually doesn't take into account when we destroy certain elements and we re-render them again. We work together on inlining of Google Fonts, which is an optimization that speeds up largest contentful paint. We recently introduced support for Adobe fonts as well that you can expect as part of version 12.2. And also extraction and inlining of critical CSS, which has been a pretty useful implementation relying on a tool called Critters. Talking about Core Web Vitals and SEO, Crunchbase released this interesting case study where they're sharing how they have about 1 million weekly users and 70% of their traffic is in fact organic. The application crunchbase.com is entirely built with Angular and server-side rendering. So if you're interested in their story, how they moved away from a legacy Rails stack, where some of their requests were taking 20 seconds to process, to 150 milliseconds, this might be an interesting blog post for you. All right, so now let me talk a little bit on what is new in Angular version 12. A couple of the highlights are we're investing as usual on keeping Angular evergreen and up to date. So investing in simplification and modern standards, as well as we introduced a couple of feature drops. Feature drops that we introduced they're very similar to what you'd see in Android, where in Android you get an operating system update and you have a couple of new features that you can take advantage of. It is similar with Angular. You run ng update and you have a couple of new features or under the hood performance improvements that are directly operating on top of your code base. Also, we introduced some new tooling on Google I/O that I'll mention quickly. So modern standards and simplification. The two major efforts here that we worked on are the deprecation of IE11. We run a community RFC just to see what will be the feedback of Angular developers. And we received actually an overwhelmingly positive feedback with this decision, because this would finally unblock people from using features such as CSS variables. We're planning to remove version 11 support i.e. 11 support in version 13. And the second effort on modern standards and simplification is the deprecation of View Engine. View Engine is the legacy compilation and rendering pipeline that we worked on prior to what we released in version 9 called Ivy. And for View Engine, we have a two-step deprecation process. Before we moved with this decision, though, we looked at our CLI telemetry. We noticed that the vast majority of people are already using Ivy. Here you can see how many people are using the enable Ivy flag set to false. And as you can see, there are just a couple of folks, and our belief is that they were just primarily eventually using out-of-date instructions from blog posts on the internet. So given that the majority of the ecosystem is now running Ivy, we took a couple of steps. First, we enabled Ivy library distribution for everyone. And we also deprecated View Engine by disallowing people to create new applications with View Engine. And rather than that, they could now stick to Ivy directly, so that we can easier transition all the libraries in the ecosystem to Ivy as well. All right, so now let me talk quickly about the feature drops. By default, now we enabled Webpack version 5. So we have had this strategy recently where we're enabling features as an opt-ins in minor releases. After that, we're giving them a couple of months of trial. And if developers are generally satisfied and we truly believe that they bring value to people, we enable them by default for everyone. An example was Webpack version 5, which we enabled as an opt-in in version 11 of Angular, and we made the default in version 12. We did something similar with Webpack 5's persistent disk caching. Now you can experiment with it, but it is not enabled by default until we figure out that the experience is stable and reliable for everyone. The Ivy language service is another such example. We introduced better error messages, where for the top errors, you'll be able to also get the URL. When you follow this URL, you're going to go directly to a errors guide with a video which explains how you can exactly approach on fixing the error that you got and what this actually means. We worked on resource inlining. This is something that I already mentioned around our collaboration with Chrome, and Tailwind support, which was based on another community feedback, a piece of feedback where we run a survey on Twitter. We got quite a few responses there about post-CSS plugins developers would want to see in the Angular CLI, and we saw that the vast majority of people wants to see post-CSS plugin for Tailwind, so we just introduced it. All right, so version 12 features. Inline SAFs has been something that has been requested for a while, and our CLI build pipeline evolved to an extent that allows us to enable this for everyone. We introduced knowledge coalescing, which is an ECMAScript 2020 feature that TC39 standardized like last year. So this is now part of your Angular templates as well. We enabled production builds by default for better interoperability with different cloud providers, and also for making sure that nobody deploys their development builds to production, which unfortunately has been the case for some applications that we found. Also strict mode by default, which makes sure that TypeScript applies stricter type checking on top of your TypeScript code and also your Angular templates. And finally, also end-to-end testing updates, where we're working for better integrations between Cypress, Angular CLI. Also, we have been collaborating with WebDriver.io, Test Cafe, and Nightwatch.js. So a couple of community contributions that I would want to highlight quickly. We have now the feature to add metadata to HTTP interceptors. We also have a min and max validators in forms, thanks to Sonu. We have richer functionality for the abstract control thanks to Mike. And now you can initialize some piece of code. You can run some initialization logic and wrap it into an observable before you bootstrap your Angular application. Previously, the functionality only allowed promises, and app initializer with observables was a very highly voted feature request that Yadong helped us introduce as part of Angular core. And finally, the new tool that we introduced as part of Google I/O 2021, Angular DevTools. So as you're probably familiar, there was a tool called Augury that our partners from Rango.io have been maintaining for a while. With the introduction of Ivy, we decided to build a more robust set of debugging APIs that we can base a new Chrome DevTools extension on. So we worked with Rango in order to introduce Angular DevTools that provides similar component explorer to what Augury used to provide, but with a profiler on top. So the profiler would allow you to preview what exactly is happening in your application, how much time you're spending in change detection, and how many times the change detection runs. We can also see what triggers it and preview the change detection runs per component. And finally, I would want to also share my gratitude to everyone who has been collaborating and contributing to Angular. We spent a lot of time over the past year making sure that we have a reasonable amount of open pull requests. Originally, there were a couple of hundreds. Now we reduced them to 170. We have been very aggressively going through the pull requests and working with authors in order to get their contribution in the framework. In total, we have about 19,000 pull requests to Angular. They're not only from team members, but clearly from community members as well, where there are thousands of engineers helping us make Angular better. Thank you very much for this, and thank you very much for listening to my talk today. If you have any feedback for the talk, please leave it at mgv.io/talk, and I'd love to answer your questions from the chat.
Thank you, Minko. That was awesome. I love seeing all the progress, especially DevTools. I know everybody was like freaking out about that. So next up, we're going to have Jia speaking. And Jia, I can go ahead and share your screen anytime you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. I will share my screen.
There we go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jia, and today I would like to talk about Zone.js by some use cases examples. So currently, I'm a software engineer of this dot, and I have been contributing to Zone.js about 4 years. Now I'm the co-owner of Zone.js and also an Angular collaborator. So today I would like to make a very brief introduction about what is Zone.js and why you need Zone.js. And I'll talk about a little bit about how Zone.js is used in Angular. So Zone.js is a very important part of Angular, but most of the Angular developer doesn't use it directly. So I also would like to introduce Zone.js by some real user examples. So Zone.js is a library introduced, I think, 7 years ago, and it is created. This library was created by Branford, inspired by the Dart language, and Zone is an execution context that persists across asynchronous operations. So this is the features Zone.js provided. So it provides an additional execution context and also a set of lifecycle hooks of asynchronous tasks and a global general error handler for the asynchronous operations. So I would like to use some code sample to explain these features. So Zone.js provides another execution context other than the default built-in one provided by JavaScript engine. So in this code, we have a zone and we run a function inside this zone. So then suddenly we have a new execution context imagine you can access this context by some magic keyword, zone this, and this new context will be the same with the zone currently the function is running into. And not only the line 4 here is a synchronized call, but for the callback inside a synchronized operation, such as set timeout or promise them, the context, you can still access this new context zone this, and the value will still will be the same. Will be the zone that the current asynchronous operation was scheduled. So we have a new context that can persist across synchronized and asynchronous operations. And this is another example to show how Zone.js work internally and how those asynchronous lifecycle hooks operate. So here we have a code. This is without Zone.js, how set timeout works inside the JavaScript engine. So here we have a stack and web APIs. This is browser on Node.js, and this is macro task queue. So let's see how this code executed. So we call set timeout in the main stack, and it will call the native API and tell, for example, the browser to tell, okay, I want to schedule something in 1 second. And after that, the stack is finished. And after 1 second, the browser and transfer this timeout callback, set timeout task into the internal macro task queue. And if there is no other task in this queue, the browser will send the callback to the main stack. So the callback of this set timeout will be invoked. So this is how a set timeout working inside the JavaScript VM. So let's see if we run the same code inside the zone. And this zone, we provided several hooks on schedule, on invoke, and on has task, and how everything works again. So in the stack, we create a new zone with these lifecycle hooks. And then we run a function inside of it. And we run the set timeout. Because we run this set timeout inside the zone, instead of calling the native API of browser directly, we will trigger lifecycle hooks on scheduled task first. So this will tell the zone, okay, there is some new asynchronous task will be scheduled inside this zone. So the developer can do something such as log or some asynchronous task tracing logic inside these hooks. And then the zone will call the native set timeout API, and just like the previous example. And because at the very beginning, the internal state of the zone is stable, there is no task inside. And after we schedule a task, set timeout task, we have a new task was scheduled. So the zone become unstable, and the internal macro task count will become from 0 to 1. So this on-has task will also be triggered. And after that, the main stack finished. Just the same logic, the browser will transfer the set timeout task to the macro task queue after 1 second. And because this is the first one, so it will move the callback to the stack. And also because this callback running inside the zone, so it will trigger on invoke task lifecycle hooks of the zone before the callback was invoked. So it will tell the zone, okay, there is some callback of the asynchronous operation will be invoked in this zone. So we can also do something inside it, such as performance measurement, something like that. And after that, the real user code of the callback will be invoked. And because this callback of this asynchronous operation was invoked, so this task has been consumed. So the zone becomes stable again. So the macro task the count of the macro task become from 1 to 0 again, and the zone becomes stable. So the on-hash task was triggered again. So this is how everything works inside the zone for the same set timeout operations. So not only set timeout, such promise, SML HTTP request, all the possible asynchronous tasks is patched by zone, so we can trace the status of all those asynchronous operations. So our zone also provide on-handle error lifecycle hooks to provide a general unified way to handle all the errors happens in the asynchronous operations. So this is the feature Zone.js provide. So why should we use Zone.js? So basically, if you want to manage or monitoring the asynchronous operations, you may want to use Zone.js, such as the asynchronous test, the task tracing and debug, and perform asynchronous performance measurement, framework auto-run, user action tracing, or some automatic resource releasing. So I will use some demo to show some of those use cases. So here we have the first one is a long stack trace. So here we have user code. We have several 2 buttons, and in the first button, in the main function, we bound a event listener to the button click, and in this event listener, we bound another event listener to the second button. And in this event listener, we throw an error. So if we don't have the libraries of Zone.js, if we see the stack trees, we will only see, okay, something happened in this throw error code, but we don't know that the logic calling history. We don't know why this error was thrown. So from the developer perspective, we want to see all the logic relationship. We want to see, okay, this error was thrown because the listener was bound to button 2, and this bounding happened in the event listener of the button 1. So with Zone.js, all this logic relationship is possible. So here we are using the zone, the long stack trees zone spec provided by zone, and we click the first button, and okay, I have this breakpoint, and we click this throw error button, and let's see the console, and we can see long stack trees, and to include all the calling history and the logic relationship. We can see, okay, this error was caused by the main function call and by the first button bound logic, and finally the throw error function. So this will be very useful when you want to debug some error cases. And of course, because we can trace all the status of the asynchronous task, so we can do something like tracking and counting of the asynchronous operations. And this is very simple. In this code sample, we randomly generate a lot of set timeout. And if you run this code inside the zone, you can see, okay, a lot of asynchronous tasks were scheduled, and then they are being invoked and finished. So this is another example. And performance profiling. So for example, here we have a button click. Inside of it, we have a lot of asynchronous, maybe long waiting jobs. And if you want to do some performance profiling, if you write something like performance start, performance end, it will not get the correct result because all asynchronous work will happen later. So you can write some zone code to make it easily implement. So here we have a sample. Let's see how this zone work. So we have a profiling zone here. Okay. So in this performance profiling zone, we implement the onInvoke task. That means when the callback is about to invoke, we start a performance timer. And after this task was invoked, we calculate the time difference and to calculate the performance correctly. So we only need to implement this one hooks, then we can calculate all the asynchronous performance correctly and very easily. And also, if you want to automatically release some resource, you can also use Zone. For example, this is a Node.js example. So Zone.js not only work in browser, it also works in Node.js, Electron, or JavaScript environment. So for example, we open a file descriptor and we want to do some asynchronous task with this file descriptor. And we want to close this file descriptor after all those asynchronous tasks are done. And without Zone, you have to write some complex logic to see, okay, the task 1 finished or not, the task 2 finished or not. And when everything is finished without error, I can, close this file descriptor. But with Zone, the user code, you don't need to change the user code. You just need to write a zone, and in the on-has task, when the zone is stable without any macro task pending, you can just close the file descriptor. So the user can focus on the business logic. And we can also we can use all those features together to track the user actions. For example, this is a website. We have a view button, we have a place order button, and in each button we have some HTTP request. And if we want to track tracing what the user is doing in this website, we can write a zone to do that. So here is a demo. So when the user click the view order button and write a zone, and we can trace the user action. So we can see, okay, this button is clicked, and the HTTP request, two HTTP requests is sent, and what is the URL, and how much time is cost per HTTP request, and totally the button click, how much time cost of this button click. And the same thing happens when we click the place order button. So the user code is the same. We don't change the user code, but we only implement one zone. We can automatically trace every actions what the users are doing. So, and of course the UI auto rendering. So for example, here we have several other buttons, and we do something such as HTTP request, set timeout, or some synchronized operations. And inside of each button logic, we update some internal date, and we want to render the UI after the data is updated. So, and we don't want to call the render UI function in each of those methods whenever the data is updated. And we can also write a UI auto-rendering zone to do that. So here we can see the code. This is the button click code. We only updated the date. We didn't call the refresh UI code. So, but the UI will automatically be refreshed, and then the newest date will be updated in the UI. So this can be done because we write a zone here. So after on-invoke task, after something happened, after some callback happened, we just call the update UI code automatically. So this is also a very typical use cases of zone. And of course, we can do a synchronized test much easier with zone. And in Angular, we use sync test and fake sync test. And fake sync test can make a synchronized test asynchronous tests synchronously. So it will make the test much more stable and faster. So Zone.js is all those features. Angular use all those features provided by Zone.js. So the core part, ng-zone service in Angular, the responsibility of ng-zone is tell when to trigger change detection and when something happened. And in the test part, we use async test, fake async test, and sync test to make developer write asynchronous test more easily. And Angular also use the global error handling hooks provided by Zone to handle all the errors in the user code. And also Angular can use a debug tracing long stack trees Zone to track or debug the user errors more easily. So I think Angular user will not use the Zone API directly. They basically are using some Zone functionality by use the ng-zone service. So you can run some code inside ng-zone to trigger change detection automatically. Or sometimes you don't want that happens. You can use run outside Angular. And this will not trigger change detection automatically. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. So next up, I am going to give a quick presentation on contributing to open source. Some of our favorite topics. Let's see. Go ahead and present here. Can everyone see that? I'm assuming yes. Okay, great. Awesome. All right. So contributing to open source. Yes. This is a question I get a lot as an open source contributor. How can I contribute to open source? Right. And I'm sure Minko and Jack get that a lot too. Well, the great thing is that contributing to open source is actually really, really easy. And there's so many different ways to do so. So today we're going to do a quick talk about just contributing to open source and like a quick start guide so that you guys can start contributing today. My name's Tracy. You can find me on Twitter at LadyLeet. I'm the CEO of a company called This.Labs. We're a 50% consultancy. We love everything we do, and we love the JavaScript community. I'm also on the RxJS core team, a GDE, a Microsoft MVP, and also love community stuff. So do a lot of stuff there. Going back to my day job, I love this job because it's pretty cool. We get to work on some amazing projects and teams. Twilio, Google, Roblox, Wikimedia, T-Mobile, Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a really fun place to be. And we're hiring, especially Angular developers and others. So definitely reach out to me, Tracy at this dot, or find me on Twitter at LadyLeet. And I love talking to new developers. So just, come hang out. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, the biggest question here is how can I contribute to open source? Okay, well, we're going to talk about a few things today. First, we're going to talk about my journey into open source. Then we're going to talk about the why, right? Like, why do you actually want to do so? And then also how, based on your why. And then we'll go over some do's and don'ts that you need to consider as you start your journey into open source. So let's go ahead and start off with my journey. So, I learned how to code a few years ago. And I was like, wow, JavaScript community is really awesome. How do I start getting involved? And as you all know, I'm on the RxJS core team and I'm a GDE for Angular and a Microsoft MVP. So how on earth did I do this? Well, my journey was pretty simple and organic, I feel like. So I joined the community. That's the first thing I did. I found Twitter. I started talking to people. I found out who was talking about Angular, who was speaking at Angular conferences, what conferences were going on, and got to know the community. That was awesome. I loved everybody. And then I started to share and educate. So I started sharing my experience and helped educate other people through the things that I was learning on my coding journey. I blogged about everything I learned. I remember when, Angular material was in alpha and I was like trying my darndest to figure it out and write blogs about it. and I helped where I could online. So this helped the community know I was interested in topics, and I was able to give back in my own way, even as a beginner. This also helped me become a valued member of the community. The next thing I did was I met maintainers, right? So meet people so you know who they are and they get to know you. This is important. I met open source maintainers and developed relationships online, at meetups, at conferences. If you're just like nice, friendly, and helpful, right, the rest is going to come. And then the last piece was actually starting to contribute more, right? So I always knew I wanted to give back more than I was to the community. So, you know, I just kept a lookout to see where help was needed. And I was great friends with the folks on the RxJS core team already. And they were struggling to get like their documentation up to date. And, you know, I was like, oh, I can help with that. That's fine. So I volunteered to gather a docs team up to jumpstart the docs. So, you know, I started, you know, an Angular repo for that. And then all of a sudden the docs came to life. So that was so cool. And after I started doing all that, and I started spending just a lot of time on jumpstarting this initiative, then, you know, the RxJS Tour team decided that I should be on the team. So that was amazing. I would definitely say one thing is if you start contributing, don't expect to become part of a core team. That's not really the point, right? The point is to be helpful, contribute. And then, you know, if you want to be rewarded in that way, then, you know, maybe at some point in time that'll happen, which is awesome. So hopefully that my journey kind of helped you guys understand, you know, I feel like how easy it is to start contributing to open source. And hopefully provide you all with some tips. But I want to talk about your why and how for contributing to open source as well. So the first question you want to ask yourself is why? Why do you want to contribute to open source? Is it functional? Is it aspirational? Right? Both of these paths are really awesome, but let's just go ahead and define these really quickly. So, you know, there's a ton of people, right? So functional, if you talk about, you know, your functional goals, there's a ton of people who work, you know, at a company and they use a particular framework. Let's say it's Angular, RxJS. And as they work on projects, they need like help with something or something's broken or, you know, they need to know about a new release or something like that, right? Like if you want to fix something in open source or get involved that way, I would consider this functional. And then aspirational. So open source is just like a great way to build your career, get new jobs, increase your knowledge within a technology, right? That's aspirational. And both of these paths, again, are totally awesome, but how you approach them is just a little bit different. So let's explore functional first, right? So first things first, right? If you're doing this for functional reasons, give before you ask. Your life is going to be 10 times easier and you're going to get 10 times the result if you're already a contributor to the community or that repo you're looking to fix for your work. If you want to know the roadmap that's maybe not published, right? You're going to get in the know better if you're like already in there. So if you can, always try to give and contribute before you have to ask, right? So the second thing is submit an issue first and ask for feedback, right? So this is really important. You don't want to just like jump into something. You always want to submit an issue and kind of figure out whether, you know, what you want to contribute is actually useful or not. In open source, there's a lot of things that go on behind closed doors. You might like really want a feature, but maybe the core team has already talked about it and decided against it for some reason. Maybe like the work you want to be done is already being worked on privately and you just don't know about it, or maybe it's already planned. So you don't want to waste your time if something's not going to be merged. And there's just a lot under the surface that you might be unaware of, right? And so the other thing is finding maintainers in other forums. So what I mean by this is just like building organic relationships. You know, GitHub can be, you know, a messy, noisy place. So reach out to maintainers on Twitter or email if you need a response. Again, GitHub notifications, like I can't keep track of any of my GitHub notifications. Send a personal message about your question and maybe you'll get a quicker answer that way. But, you know, make sure not to be entitled or impatient because people are busy and like, quite honestly, you're probably not their top priority. But you might be more of a top priority if you're already contributing to the repo, right? So again, going back to number one, like give before you ask. And the last tip I would say in this how approach is to make sure you're building genuine relationships. No one likes to be used or feel used in relationships, and they don't like to feel like you're only like self-serving yourself, right? I mean, no relationship likes this. So just remember to be genuine, and remember that open source is a lot of like doing good for the community and building things for free and public. So it's like that's the community, right? It's not to serve like the selfish needs of your others. The next why, the aspirational why, right, of why you might be wanting to contribute to open source is awesome. I like it because it's much more flexible, right? And some of these tips also, if you're more in the functional why, this helps you build those relationships. So I think the first thing is like, can you be a successful contributor or not, right? So when you're aspirational, you get to choose what projects you contribute to. When you look at a project, you should look at the issues and ask yourself, can I be successful in this? Are there issues I can tackle? Have I used this library and there's like something I can do to help, like documentation or something else, like some improvements that I see? Another thing you want to ask yourself is, do I like this team? You can look at the RFCs, the PRs, the responses and issues. Like, do you like these people? Are they nice? Are they not? Do they want to collaborate? Who knows, right? Can I see myself working with them? And if it's a no, because this is aspirational, you can just go do something else, no problem, right? There's tons of teams and tons of different cultures out there, and you will definitely find your fit if you look. The next thing to do is to make sure when you're thinking about solving a problem that you think is relevant within a project, make sure that these are actually problems that the core team agrees needs to be solved, and work on those first. So again, there's tons of issues that are probably marked as good first issue or looking for help. If you want more things tagged as that, you can open up an issue and ask for it. But again, before you start working on an issue, let's say you see an issue there. Before you start working on it, you definitely want to double check by commenting and asking like, hey, is anybody working on this? If not, I'm going to start. And once you hear back, you can go ahead and start contributing. So another really easy way is helping with the docs, right? This is number 3. So there's probably tons of open source maintainers that y'all look up to. And I'm telling you, I've interviewed so many of them. And most of them said, hey, I started with the docs. Docs always need help. If you ask any maintainer of a project, I swear like 90% of them are going to say, we can always use help with the docs, right? So if you're using the documentation actively, you're going to probably find holes. Some things need live examples, better wording, better explanations, typos. Like those are all things you can do to contribute that are going to be really useful. And the last thing you want to do is make sure that you are actually, educating and sharing, right? Like if you're really passionate about something or a technology or a library, write blog posts about your experience. What do you love? How do you use certain features? What are upcoming features that you're excited about? What challenges did you run into? How did you solve those problems? And then just share that with the community. You don't have to like directly contribute code to a project repo to be useful within a community or relevant within a community. Any education that you have, like even if it's beginner stuff and there's 10 articles about how to set up an Angular app out there, like your contribution is another way people can like learn, right? Everybody has different learning styles. So the last thing I want to touch on today is just a few do's and don'ts within open source. So let's go ahead and start with the do's. Like number 1, make sure to have compassion, right? Like maintainers are usually working for free on nights and weekends. Treat maintainers like people. Remember that they're just humans, right? And humans can only handle so many things at one time. And if you treat them like crap, they're not going to care to help you. Other thing is be professional. Like, okay, open source seems like the Wild West out there. It's not your job. It's not what you get paid for, right? But like, if you're not professional at your job, you could probably get fired, right? But like, it's the same thing in open source, right? Like make sure you are treating with those relationships professionally because no one likes to deal with people who don't respect each other. Also assume the best of intentions. Like if you go into a project and you're like, this sucks for this reason, I could fix this, this is whatever. Like or like, why are you ignoring me? Or like, how could you write this code, right? All those types of things. Nobody's going to give you the time of day, right? So if somebody's ignoring you, they're probably not ignoring you. So make sure to assume the best of intentions. It's really a tireless and thankless sometimes job to keep everyone happy. Code of conduct. Treat people as you would want to be treated. Always make sure you're abiding by a code of conduct that the project has. And if a project doesn't have a code of conduct, make sure you generally just like be nice and follow a good code of conduct. Now for the don'ts that kind of mirror that, right? Like don't act or be entitled, right? This comes, same thing with the idea of like, be nice and be patient. Don't think that you are a maintainer's biggest priority. Most maintainers have a full-time job and a full-time job in open source. Like imagine having to juggle an 80-hour work week and then like, you know, your little bug doesn't matter that much to them, right? I mean, it might, but like still same thing, right? Like have some respect, right? Don't be annoying. Like you know, like you can email, but don't email 10 times a day about an issue. Follow up, but follow up within reason. And also don't complain. Like everybody's trying their best, and you know, sometimes technical decisions are made. And if you don't understand why, it's probably because you're just not as close to the problem as the people who are making the decisions, right? Complaining about something you're getting for free is just really not the nicest way to approach open source. And, you know, if you don't like it, they're probably going to tell you to just go use a different library. So hopefully some of these do's and don'ts help from a cultural perspective so that when you guys get in there, it'll be more fun for you all. I hope this talk was useful. If you have any questions about my journey, I'm always happy to talk. Again, you can find me on Twitter at LadyLeet. And it's just so easy and simple, again, to get into open source. And hopefully you guys understand some of the nuances now of how people interact with each other. And I really hope to see more of you all like out there contributing to the community because we need it, whether it's education, whether it's documentation. Angular community needs like more blogs, you know, talking about their experiences. So definitely start contributing. Reminder again that we're hiring. Oh my God, it's so amazing. We have a team of about 50 developers. It's really fun. It's 100% remote and worldwide. So feel free to email me. My email is tracy@this.co. Again, I'm super happy to help with whatever anybody needs. And now we'll go to some questions. And, you know, I think we only have one question in the YouTube chat. So we'll take that. It's from Minko. And it was, is there a place on Google for the changes in V12 and like generally V12 overall?
Yeah, we have the changelog that is available at github.com/Angular/Angular. You can find the changelog documents there. And for higher level efforts, like bigger projects, you can look at Angular.io/guide/roadmap. I got to learn all these URLs by heart.
And Ja and Minko, you guys being two great open source contributors, did I miss anything of like how or why or anything like that? Any tips you all have for contributing?
You did great.
Okay. And you know, I guess another question is like, if you know, I mean, this is an Angular meetup, so if these folks on this meetup want to contribute to Angular, like, what's the best way to do so?
So I can share quickly, and Jelly can share more details about Zone.js maybe. A good starting point could be our documentation guide. We have a guide on exactly how you can contribute to the Angular documentation, which provides very small actionable steps. So really, literally, anyone can do that as soon as they have a GitHub account.
That's amazing. I love that. What about you, Ja?
Yeah, I think documentation is a very good start, and also the test code. But when I contribute to Zone.js, I think 70 of my time was caused by writing tests. And so I did some edge cases for multiple platform or browsers, even for the same cases, will be very helpful, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really funny because I said like 90% of maintainers will tell you we need help with the docs, but like of the three of us on this like meetup, it's 100% actually. Documentation, please. Another question is, when is open source optimization necessary for a junior dev while on task work? I don't know if I really understand that question. When OS optimization? Does anybody want to try to answer that?
Sam, do you want to share more details?
When is optimization necessary?
What does optimization mean in this case?
Maybe it's like, okay, a junior developer is like working at work on a task, and when should they contribute to open source? Like, when is it relevant for them?
I can say that it has been valuable through my entire career. So if you're a junior developer and you just want to get some mentorship from people, you can start helping them out with some of the issues that they're facing that are appropriate for junior developers. They're going to review your source code, give you a lot of feedback, and you're going to be able to learn from there. And the cool thing is that you can pick the projects not only based on their complexity, but also based on your interests. So if you're interested in healthcare, you can just have a look at healthcare projects on GitHub, and you can start contributing to some of these projects, and people will be able to give you actionable feedback, and you'll be able to learn with them.
I love that as a tip, because I feel like, junior developers, and also I feel like a lot of developers who maybe have had some experience, maybe they're in the mid-level and they're having trouble. I hear this a lot, like, I'm having trouble with like career growth within my company because I don't have a lot of mentorship. If you go out and you contribute to projects, like bigger projects, or, people working at larger companies, then all of a sudden, like, you have better standards set for yourself, right? Like if you're working on a team of just junior developers and you're the team lead, it's very hard for you to grow. But if you like all of a sudden are like working on Angular documentation, like you're having like Angular developers who work at Google probably review your code, or at least like maintainers, who like have a lot of experience, and you'll learn a lot better from them. Like, I shouldn't be doing it this way. I should be doing it this way. Understand better structure, understand like not how to hack things together. And, I think that's incredibly valuable. I didn't think about it that way. I mean, it makes sense though, right? Like if you're not getting mentorship or learning, or you can't find a job as a junior developer, like you might as well just like join a project, and like, then you're working on a team.
Getting the credits for the resume.
That is great advice. Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. We hope you had fun, and we hope to continue with the Angular, Angular RTP meetups, but it's hard with COVID still. So we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much, Minko and Jia.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for having me.